Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Success Insight podcast. Today's episode of Success Insight is another addition to our Outdoor Adventure series, and it's a pleasure to introduce you to Ralf Rohner. Now, Ralf captains a Boeing 777-300ER for an international carrier, and when he's not working in the cockpit, his interest includes landscape astrophotography and deep space photography. Ralf has authored numerous articles about astrophotography, which have been published on the Milky Way Photographer's website. And really, I have to share, I first learned about Ralf's work as I was beginning to learn about astrophotography, because as most of you know, all of you know, I live out here in Las Vegas and we have lots of dark skies, lots of access to the stars. And when I started to see Ralf's work over and over again on Facebook, I was thinking, I need to meet this man. His work is wonderful. So Ralf, welcome to Success Insight Podcast and the Outdoor Adventure Series.
Hi, everybody. Pleasure.
Fantastic. And for our listeners' benefit, Ralf, where are you located right now?
I'm based in Switzerland, near the biggest city in Switzerland, which is Zurich, about 12 kilometers north of the city.
Gotcha. I have never been to Switzerland. Now that I know you, it's definitely on my to-do list.
That's good.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your background, just to give our listeners a little bit of a flavor for who you are and what you do.
Okay, yeah. I was born in Switzerland, actually in the city of Zurich. I did my normal schooling there, college, and started university and medical school to become a doctor. And parallel, I was applying with the company that was called Swissair by then as a pilot. And then after 2 years, I switched from the university to pilot school and became a pilot for Swissair until they went bankrupt in 2001 after the 9/11 incidents. Then the new company, which is called Swiss International Airlines, took over. I started flying for them. And I've been a captain now since 2013. And since 2 years, I'm flying the long haul, the big planes for us, which is the Boeing 777-300ER. My family, I'm married. I have 2 kids, a twin boy and girl, which are 9 years old right now. And as you said, my favorite hobby is astrophotography.
Fantastic. Well, to say the very least, in more ways than one, you have your hands full.
Yeah.
Both family, kids, and you have all of your guests, passengers on your flights. They're in your hands.
Yes, of course. Yeah, quite literally, actually. I have the plane in my hands and everybody's sitting inside, so I have them in my hands as well. But they can feel safe.
Oh, most definitely. And I'm curious, before we kind of dive in more into the astrophotography, you were in medical school, and then did you just decide, I think this is not the life for me. I want to fully...
Not at all. Basically, I grew up next to the airport of Zurich and saw the planes flying by every day when I was a kid. And I was actually interested in aviation. And my father as well, who didn't work in aviation, but he was a big fan of the airplanes. And so he took us as a kids to the airport to watch the planes take off and land. So I actually always kind of felt connected to aviation. And then you have to be 20 to apply as a pilot. So they had roughly 1,000 applications, and they took like 80 every year. So the chances were not very good to be taken by them. So you had to have an alternate plan, as we say, as pilots. That's why I started medical school. If they wouldn't have taken me as a pilot, then I would obviously have finished university and probably a doctor. I have my patience in my hands now.
Well, I have to say that's a good problem to have, though, Ralf.
Yeah.
It's a good problem to have.
Actually, yeah, because the whole screening process and stuff, that took like 1.5 years. So that's why it took like 2 years until I got the go-ahead from Swissair to join their pilot training program, which actually was quite nice because in the US, you have to pay for yourself. I got my pilot's license paid by the company.
I have to say, not to get political, but things are done very well over in Europe. There's certain things, I mean, we all have our
Certain
challenges.
things, not everything.
But certain things are done very well. I find it very comforting to hear growing up myself in the Detroit suburbs, Detroit, Michigan. We were on the flight path for one of the runways at Detroit Metropolitan Airport.
Okay.
And it was typically in the afternoons. And it was just fun to watch those airplanes just come over the house. And we were, I don't know, it's like 20 miles away. But still, it's like, wow. And there's just something about airplanes and watching them land, watching them take off, especially the big ones, because it's an amazing feat of engineering and science, physics, that it can happen. And when you had shared that your father had taken you to the airport, my parents took us, my sister and I, to the airport also to watch the flight. So I appreciated that story. When did you first become interested in either photography or the astrophotography? When did that start to occur?
Well, photography was basically in 1991. It was when I came over to San Diego for 3 months to learn English, actually. And I took a camera with me, and the U.S. landscapes are just awesome. So I was on my weekends, I was driving around and taking pictures, daylight pictures at that time of the landscapes. So that's when I started with photography. I still was film, nothing digital at those days.
Mm-hmm. As a photographer, I mean, myself, I appreciate that. You start taking pictures wherever you're at. You carry your camera everywhere you go.
Yeah.
When did this interest in astrophotography start to take off?
Well, that was the end of the 90s when I bought my first telescope. Actually, in college, I was telling everybody I will study astronomy because I was reading those cosmology books and I was very interested in those topics. And I always told everybody I will study astronomy. Then when I came back actually from San Diego, I changed my mind. I said, okay, now I'll rather become either doctor or pilot. So I'll try that. And then in the end of the 90s, I think it was 98 or something, I bought my first telescope. Did some visual astronomy first, then as it is quite normal, as if you own a telescope, you want to start taking images through the telescope. So I started with deep sky photography around 2000.
I can imagine that the ability to take deep sky photography at that time versus here we are, 2021, the technology has changed, the capabilities have changed.
Completely changed.
Yeah. What were your deep sky objects that you were shooting?
Well, I wasn't a very good deep sky photographer at that time. I was still working with film, or dia films. So I was mainly shooting the bright targets like Orion Nebula, like Andromeda Galaxy, and really the obvious things you start with when you start doing deep sky. I was still guiding manually, and it was quite a different hobby.
I think it's really amazing what you just said. You know, people start off with the bright objects, Andromeda Galaxy, the Orion Nebula, because that next to the Milky Way, that's exactly what I have been doing. And I'm like, look what I did. Look what I did.
That's good because that's the easiest stuff. It's not easy at all, but it's the easiest targets. So it's good to start with them. And it also gives you a feeling of achievement. If you get your first deep sky object on your screen or on print in those days, and then, hey, that's not just in a magazine. That was me taking this image. It's actually there. I saw it, and that's a great feeling.
One thing I think is interesting too is you started off with the telescopes. My background, I was in the IT space for a while as a business consultant. Then I became a coach, a leadership development coach. But I was a photographer. It's how I paid my way through school. And I noticed there's two paths to the astrophotography space. There's the individual who had the interest in astronomy, bought the first telescope, and as you said, wanted to eventually capture what they were seeing, which is the route you took. And then there's the photographer like me who is like, okay, I know I'm a good photographer. I love being out underneath the stars. That's why for me, Las Vegas, or at least the surrounding areas of Las Vegas, are fantastic.
Yeah.
And so my next question was, how do I do this?
Yeah.
As you started to kind of accumulate your experiences of the photography, where did you find yourself going to take these pictures?
Actually, I started doing landscape astrophotography in the US. It was 2015, and I was with my kids were 4 then, and we did a camping trip as a camper for 3.5 weeks. And for this trip, I bought a new camera, which was a Canon 7D Mark II, which was much better camera than the 20D I was using to that day.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also the days when the first trackers became popular. So as I was doing astrophotography through the telescope, it was obvious for me I had to track the sky to get better results or less noise. So I bought one of these little trackers and took them along on our camping trip. And we were driving around and doing the normal sightseeing tourist stuff during the day. And at night, when the family was sleeping, I was outside and shooting stars. And that's when I took my first landscape astrophotography shots. And I think the first image I ever did was in Monument Valley. There's a very nice campground there where you have the whole view of the Monument Valley. And I was just sitting in front of my camper and shooting all night because it was so awesome.
I love that. And, there was a shot at Monument Valley showed up on Facebook this week. It was the main road into one of the main roads into the valley. You see the monuments,
yeah,
and they set up the shot. In fact, there's some astrophotography icons. And by the way, Ralf, I would consider you an icon. And so don't let this go to your head. Okay. However, they live here in Las Vegas. I want to meet them, but they took the shot at Monument Valley. And I was there a couple of years ago with a colleague of mine. I remember just getting up early just to see the stars. And it never even dawned on me to want to take pictures of them. I have one question, but before about the word landscape photography, because I'd like you to explain that. But before I do want to acknowledge the fact that you said, here's the camera I have, the Canon 7D Mark II, and I specifically recall in preparing for the show today, is you didn't really want to get into a discussion about which camera should I get, but I was trying to honor that request, but you brought it up. But by the way, I shoot Canons myself, and so I appreciate that. So, but we don't have to talk about the cameras.
Well, it's basically, it doesn't matter which brand you use. They're all good.
Yeah. Well, and I think too is you just have to go out and do it. Just go out and try it. And
the worst camera is the camera that's catching dust instead of light.
Yes, very much so. And it's interesting. When I came out here, I had my camera is probably 15 years old. It's an old Canon EOS 20D. And I think
that's what I started with digital photography.
Yeah. And the ISO only went up to 800.
Yes.
And so I was really limited in my dark sky work because of the sensitivity. And so I ended up, if I had had a tracker at the time, which I didn't even know what a tracker was, I could have overcome that issue. But having said that, I now have my sets on what I do want, but we're not going to have that discussion. But so tell us a little bit more about astrophotography. You've used this term landscape astrophotography a couple of times. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, obviously, I started with what's called deep sky photography. Mm-hmm. So that's when you shoot through a telescope normally or a telephoto lens, and you just shoot the sky. That's the classic astrophotography, and you don't have any foreground in the image. And then most probably like 2010 or so when the first cameras hit the market that were capable to go to higher ISO, and you were able to capture the stars and the foreground, and the stars without star trailing. Obviously, you could do star trail shots before with landscape in it, but not the Milky Way shots we know now with pinpoint stars and the landscape in it. So that's basically what we call landscape astrophotography, because it's a landscape and you have the star sky above it.
It was interesting. There was and you know this as well, but you're active on social media, is once you start searching for a topic, you want to learn more about, all of a sudden everything about that topic shows up on your threads. And there was a shot of I forget what this was. It's a Petra. I think it was in Petra's in Jordan, I believe.
Jordan, yeah.
And there was a shot of the Milky Way coming right up above Petra. Now, somebody had brought up, that's impossible just given the orientation. I don't know. I've never been there.
It is impossible. I know the shot.
Yeah. And so what a lot of people don't realize is, you can take landscape photography with minimal star trailing, have very pinpoint sharp imagery up in the stars, but there's a lot of processing that goes on beforehand to make it really good. And so you take the landscape shot and then you integrate in the dark sky.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, you can obviously do it from a fixed tripod. You just bump up your ISO to 6,400 or even 12,800, so some modern cameras. And then you take a short enough exposure so you don't have any star trailing. Problem with that is you probably end up with a very dark foreground where you have to lift the shadows quite a bit in post-processing to have anything else than just a silhouette. And obviously with such a high ISO and the rather short exposure time you need to avoid star trailing, you will get a pretty noisy image.
Right.
Of course, you can apply some noise reduction in post-processing, but that will destroy your details. So you will not end up with an extremely high quality shot. So what we do, actually, I think I was one of the first. I didn't invent that, but I was probably one of the first applying it. Because what you do is you do stacking. So you stack different images. You take the same shots like 10 times, and then you just stack those 10 shots on top of each other, and you take a median of these 10 shots, and that makes the noise go away. Obviously, in the sky, that will produce again star trailing. So you have to have some software that matches the stars on top of each other, or you use a tracking mount. But then you have to shoot the foreground and the sky separately, and you have to merge them again in post-processing. So there's, as you said, there's quite a bit of processing going on, even without bumping the contrast or anything. It's just talking about putting the different part of the images together, which are not single exposures anymore. And that, as you said, of course, offers the possibility to do fakes, or I like to, and the community calls them composite images. I don't like that expression very much, because in deep space astrophotography, a composite is just an image made up of more than one sub exposure. But that doesn't mean it's a fake. So I don't like to call them fakes, because it's digital art after all. I call them image collage, digital art collage. And the big difference is that the sky is not in the correct position, or might not even have been taken from the same spot. I mean, you can take the southern hemisphere sky and put it on top of a foreground that was taken in the northern hemisphere. It will look weird if you know the place, but if you don't know, you probably won't notice.
Yeah. And one thing I just want to share is, and I read this online as education, from an education perspective, is even the panoramic shots of the Milky Way. And I don't know for a fact, perhaps you can take the entire arc of the Milky Way, but it wasn't until I started to read that these are actually panoramic. It's a shot of multiple panoramic images, and then you're just stitching them together. Yeah.
It's the time now in spring to do that.
Yes.
Because the Milky Way is pretty, the arch is not too high.
Yeah. So, Ralf, I'd love to get into, as you were beginning to explore the hobby, you're making this photography experience as a part of your daily life. You're going on vacation with the family and they're going to bed and you're spending your nights outside. Where are some of the places that you really have enjoyed going to, either because you knew it was going to be a great opportunity? And by the way, to our listeners, a great opportunity is when there is little to no moon. So I guess the question I would ask you, Ralf, do you plan your vacations around the new moon?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. Where are some places that you have gone that like, this is fantastic, or I really enjoy this and I can't wait to get back to see what I've captured?
Yeah, well, one of my favorite regions is the Four Corners region in the U.S. Southern Utah, northern Arizona. It's just awesome foregrounds. Because if you do landscape astrophotography, it's not just about the stars. I always say an image you should even work without a sky. So the foreground there are just awesome. There's all these desert landscapes. They're overwhelming. I grew up in the mountain country, and those deserts, they just blow me away. So that's where I was shooting quite a lot. That's also why probably my name is more known in the US than it's in Switzerland. I was doing 4 years. I was doing specific trips, just me alone for a week to 10 days around me, obviously, just to go into the desert and shoot those landscape astrophotography or nightscape images, as we call them as well. So that's the region I want to go back when the pandemic is over and I can actually come over again. The other thing I really like is obviously Switzerland, because that's my home country, and we have nice mountains, no deserts. When we have lakes, mountain lakes, where we can shoot reflecting Milky Ways, and we have really nice mountains. They look a little bit like the Rockies in the US. That's another place I obviously like to shoot, and that's in my backyard. So that's a bit easier for me to reach.
Fantastic. And for our listeners, before we head out today, Ralf is going to share his website where you can see these fantastic images. And by the way, there's one image in particular, well, actually, I would say two. One, the opportunity to shoot the Milky Way up in the mountains with the mountain lake is just, I would love to do that. I think that'd be phenomenal. But you have a shot, which I'm going to guess, you'll correct me if I'm not correct, probably from Great Basin National Park or somewhere where the bristlecone pines are. You have a shot looking up through the bristlecone pine of the Milky Way. And for our listeners, the bristlecone pine is probably the oldest tree in the world. And some of the age of these trees, they don't look like they're alive. And you're going to see these shots on Ralf's website. But these predate the time of, I guess, the pyramids, I think. But
yeah, they're like 6,000 years. Yeah.
That shot of is just like, it was just blowing me away. And I have to share this with you. My friend Linda is a photographer. She's a very good photographer. She's up in Chicago, where I just moved from last year. She's coming out here in May. And I shared your website with her this morning. So this is who I'm interviewing today, because I wanted her to get ready to amp up her game a little bit.
Okay.
She's gonna bring her A game, and she's gonna come out here and do some shooting. So how has this interest in the landscape, astrophotography, the deep space work, how has that changed your life? Some people have just hobbies.
Yeah.
This is a very
it's addictive.
Deeply, yeah.
Yeah. The shot, by the way, was not in Great Basin. I was in the White Mountains in California. It's ancient bristlecone national monument where I took it.
All right. Thanks a lot, Ralf.
But there are bristlecones in Great Basin as well. I've been there, but actually I didn't do any astro there because it was cloudy when I was there. It was just one day, and it was very windy, so I took some shots, but just in front of my tent on the camera.
Okay. Fair enough. I don't mind. I'm big. I'm man enough that I can be corrected online. So thank you very much.
So
it's a beautiful shot.
It changed my life. Obviously, it changed my vacation scheduling, because I have started to, as you mentioned, to schedule my vacations around New Moon. And before the pandemic, I tried to get away from my family for like 1 week and travel to some place on the world to specifically do astrophotography. That's one of the changes. I sleep less. Sleep is totally overrated. No, I'm kidding. Sleep is extremely important. But as an astrophotographer, obviously, you do not sleep very much when you're shooting. So I'm a little bit tired in my days off than I normally were before. So that's another change. And another change was when I see a great image today online or somewhere of an awesome landscape, I immediately start questioning myself, okay, is it possible to capture this scene with a starry sky above it? So I get my planning apps. I try to find where the shot was taken. I get my planning apps and start planning. Well, okay, does it work as a Milky Way, or does it work in winter with Orion above it? What direction must this taken, and so on. And if I decide it's a possibility, I just put a flag on Google Maps, and I want to go there. And my Google Maps is full of those green flags. I want to go there. My bucket list keeps growing.
I love that. Well, eventually you're going to say. I interviewed Peter Zelinka. I don't know if you know that name. A couple weeks ago. In fact, his episode should be published not this coming week, but the week after. And
looking forward to that. It's a great shot.
Oh, I mean, it was just when I was starting to do my research, his was one of the first ones that I realized, okay, this is what I need. And I ended up buying the move, shoot, move rotator. And because I figured I needed to get that piece down correctly, then work on the post-processing. And once I got those two, then I could upgrade to some of the equipment you're using.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's a good amount to start with. It's becoming very popular right now.
Yeah. What kind of shooting are you doing while you are in the airplane? Because I noticed you've got a couple of pictures. In fact, you wrote a little bit about this in Milky Way Photographer's online magazine about shooting inside the airplane. And is there any nuance to that? Because that's a very interesting perspective. There's the sky, the land below you, and then there's the Milky Way. How are you accomplishing that?
Well, basically, it's very similar to landscape astrophotography from a fixed tripod. Obviously, I got this whole tracker in an airplane, so it's basically fixed tripod astrophotography. Although it might sound a bit funny if I talk about fixed when you're flying in an airplane, but what I basically started with is what some passengers do. You see them images online. I'm just holding my camera to the window and just bumping up the ISO to like 12,800 and trying to shoot the series and hoping that I get one or two of them sharp. So I decided that's probably not the best way to do it. And then I saw those suction mounts where you have suction cups. You can do that, fix that tripod to a window. And as we have pretty big windows in the flight deck, I have an advantage. So I can actually fix my camera to the tripod. And then there are those lens skirts, they're called. You can produce them yourself with a little bit of string and the cloth, or you can buy them commercially for like $50, and you put them on top of your lens and they avoid the reflections in the windows. So I was starting to put my camera to the window and start shooting like this. I'm still very high ISO. I normally work with like 12,800 or 6,400. a fast lens. I have an f1.4 lens, which I almost stop down to f2 though. And then I take like 5 to 10 second shots. I take a long series, like I shoot for 20 minutes. I just leave the camera there because I have to fly the airplane. And I just leave it there and let it run. And then after 20 minutes, I shut it down and check at home what I got. And then normally I get quite a few sharp images with sharp stars. I even have successfully stacked some of them, like 10 or 12 shots in a row. They have the reasonably sharp. So I was actually able to stack them with the Sequator on Windows, which is a great freeware program for stacking, especially shots from fixed tripod.
Very nice.
So that's actually what I do. Fly the plane. I really like to emphasize that because I have a co-pilot next to me because people normally ask me, how do you do that when you're supposed to fly the plane? Okay, I do that only on cruise level where the workload is really low. I mean, if one of the pilots has to visit the toilet, we are alone in the flight deck. So that's not a problem to do all the stuff as a single pilot for like 5 minutes. And that's all it takes me to put the camera to the window and start the imaging sequence. And then I can just leave it there, let it run, and I do my chop again.
All right. I don't think you really needed to qualify, this description, but we'll leave it in. But I am curious, you fly fairly regularly, and take your camera with you everywhere.
Yeah. What
do your coworkers, the rest of the flight crew, the cabin crew, what do they think of Captain Rohner's hobby?
Well, they normally want to see the images I shoot when I say, well, what are you doing there? So I'm photographing the stars out there, and then, okay, can you show me an image? And then normally I take my phone and show them a few images that I took out of the plane, and then they'll become interested. Okay, yeah. And some of them, especially co-pilots, have started doing the same now. They even ask me to fly with them so I can show them how I do it.
I think that's wonderful. There is a whole YouTube genre culture of individuals where in the planes they have the little I guess they call them GoPros.
Yeah.
And they're basically assembling the recording the trip, and especially like the takeoff, the landing, the taxiing, which again I think is wonderful. It's the landing that I think is the most wonderful, is that you're kind of lining up to the runway and all the things that are going on, and that's my favorite part. But what has been the biggest, I don't know what you call it, aha or insight? And I kind of asked you about it during the preparation for this episode, but looking back at the biggest change in your life is how has this hobby impacted you, Ralf?
Well, one of the big ahas was when I was starting to do landscape astrophotography. I didn't consider myself a very good deep sky imager. Actually, it was just as a hobby, and it was okay, but it was producing, but it was nothing to write home about or to put online. You don't find my early images online. And then when I did that camping, a vacation with my family, I got that tractor and all the stuff, and I was basically applying the same techniques I was applying for deep sky. I was working on my computer at home to put these images together, to process them. And my wife told me, okay, if you're always sitting in front of your computer, you better do something with your images, and you better put them online or something. And I opened a Flickr account, and I uploaded them on Flickr. And that's when I got some feedback from some very good photographers, like, for example, Royce Bear, whom you certainly know. I bought his ebook prior to that vacation to learn a little bit about how to expose, what the settings were and all stuff. And then after like 3 months, I was posting my images in the ebook, I got an email from Roy's parents and said, hey, what are you doing there with this tracking and stacking stuff? And that looks quite good. And he actually used a few of my images for one of his presentations. And that's when my name became a little bit more known in the US. And all of a sudden I was asked from some really good photographers, hey, can you explain me what you do there and stuff? And I said, oh, there's something going on. I noticed that many at those days at least, many of those landscape astrophotographers actually came from landscape daylight photography. They were like just shooting daylight and sunsets, and then they started to hang around a little longer when it started to become dark, and they were starting to shoot stars. But they actually didn't know very much about deep space imaging techniques. So I decided it might be good to tell people how I do that, to help them to become better, or at least technically more advanced astrophotographers. It's awesome to see how this field has developed. Today, stacking and tracking is standard procedure. And it's just 5 years now. That has changed quite a bit. And also because my name is a little bit better known. If I go on trips, I always can meet people who want to shoot with me. And that's nice as well. So I like to work alone at night because I'm more efficient, but also I like company because it's great if you can do that together with somebody else or two or three persons, and you have fun together.
Well, first, two things. One, I want to tell you the same thing I shared with Peter Zelinka. When you come out this way, I'm your guy. Okay? And the other is, this is an opportunity, I think, for folks to get outside, enjoy themselves, breathe fresh air. And, you're learning something new, but it's also, if coming out for me to Las Vegas has been a godsend, because I can get in my car and I can go out to the Mojave or to Lake Mead or Red Rocks, to the national parks. And it's an opportunity to really enjoy your hobby and not just feel like, what am I going to do? But
exactly.
It is nice to, like you said, be around others while you're doing it. Is your wife or your kids, anybody else, inclined to say, hey, I want to go with you?
Yeah, my kids, definitely. My kids want to go with me. They're 9 now. I already took them on some trips, obviously not on the more dangerous ones. If I go on a steep mountain, or if I go out in winter in minus 10 degrees centigrade, I don't want to have the kids with me.
Right.
But in summer, it's great fun to take them along, put up a tent somewhere in the mountains, and do some stargazing while I'm shooting in parallel. That's awesome. My wife, a little bit less. She doesn't like camping too much, but she doesn't have a problem if I take the kids along.
Fantastic. Yeah, it gives her a little bit of away time, which is
exactly.
Nice. So, Ralf, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to go?
One site where actually I learned from is from Roy Spear's website. It's awesome. And they're Milky Way photographers, where I've written a few articles for. That's another great website. On Petapixels, you'll find a few articles about nightscape photography. That's another good site. And then you just Google Milky Way nightscape, so Milky Way photography, and you have a ton of really good tutorials you can find.
Okay. Now, you have a website, Ralf-Rohner.pixels, where many of your images are available for purchase.
Yes.
And so we want to encourage your listeners to our listeners to go out there. If anything, just look at what Ralf's work is. Well, look at what he's done. He's doing this is beautiful. And if you're inclined and you think it's going to look good in your home or in the office, take advantage of it.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. And you're also on Facebook. You're on Flickr. We'll put your Flickr.
Flickr, Facebook, Instagram. You find me under the name SkyPointer 2000.
Okay, SkyPointer 2000. Well, we'll definitely provide the backlinks to those sites, and we'll get Roy Spear's website as well. There was one question, and it's, how can I forget this? On our main webpage, successinsidepodcast.com, we often put a handful, 3-4 pictures on our show notes just to give our listeners and readers of the show notes and an opportunity to see your work. Would you mind sharing a couple shots with us that we can put on our webpage?
No, not at all. Of course. Sure.
Fantastic.
It'll be a pleasure.
Fantastic. Now, Ralf, before we head out, any other insight that you would like to leave our listeners with? I mean, you're an accomplished pilot, photographer, astrophotographer, again, dare I say, an icon in this world of, deep sky, dark sky, astrophotography. Any words of insight that you would like to leave our listeners?
Well, just something I learned already in flight school. One of my flight instructors told me proper preparation prevents poor performance. They called them the famous 5 Ps. That's true in aviation, but it's exactly the same in photography. And especially in landscape astrophotography, because of course you can go out and just look at the stars and start shooting. But as you mentioned, the moon phase is important and the season is important. The Milky Way is not always, at least the Milky Way core is not always visible. And it's standing in another direction and it's standing at another angle. So it's good to know all this stuff and to actually plan your image. So actually, when I go out shooting, I have an image in my mind I want to capture. And I probably know up to a few meters where I want to put my tripod up to capture that image. There are great tools for planning like Planet Pro app or PhotoPills app or TPE app where you can plan those shots at home on your phone or on your iPad. Actually have quite a good idea when you go into the field what you want to achieve. So do your planning is very important. Do all your planning with the stuff you take along. I'm not talking about photo gear, but about clothing, maybe bear sprays if you're in bear country and all the stuff for your own safety, because you're alone, maybe alone out there at night in the wild, and they're wild animals. They're not the most dangerous thing you might encounter. It's probably still the human beings you might encounter out there. But nevertheless, better be safe than sorry. So you take your warm clothes and it can get very cold at night in the desert, I noticed. 40 degrees centigrade during the day and below freezing at night. So you take your you really have to plan your stuff, take enough water and all that stuff, and do your planning, stay safe out there, and know actually what you're trying to achieve.
Fantastic.
At the same time, you have to stay flexible enough. If you go somewhere, you do your scouting and see a totally different scene you don't know about, you just skip everything you were planning and you do that other shot. So you do your planning, know what you want to do, but keep your eyes open out there, and this an opportunity arises, skip your plans and do the other thing. That's important as well. Stay flexible.
Flexible. I love it. I love it. And, for our listeners, we're going to share some links back also to the articles that Ralf wrote on Milky Way Photographer's website. And there's actually one story in particular about an encounter with some wildlife that turned out okay. However, It was when I read it, I have to say, I kind of was laughing.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I was shooting in the Uinta Mountains in Utah at the lake shore. And I was actually shooting at 360 degrees panorama. And I was closest, totally dark. So I had black trousers, a black jacket on. No lights, obviously. If you want to shoot the stars, you don't want light around you, except maybe some low-level lighting, but I didn't do that there. So I was in the complete dark clothes, and when I was shooting with my back to the water, the other direction, all of a sudden I heard loud splashes right behind me.
All right. And we're going to leave it right there because we're going to get our listeners to go out there and find out what it was and let them have a laugh. So, Ralf, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on the Success Insight podcast, our outdoor adventure series. And really, again, it's been a pleasure, true pleasure just to learn about your journey and your wonderful work. And I'm excited I hope to now call you a friend and look forward to when you get out here to the U.S. or I get to Switzerland, is to break bread and go take some photographs.
Yeah, do that.
All right, folks, we have just been chatting with Ralf Rohner. He is an accomplished landscape astrophotographer, deep sky photographer. He's a pilot. He captains a Boeing 777-300ER, and really just a wonderful, wonderful individual, and just the work that he has produced. And I can't tell you enough, this is the pleasure of having him here on the podcast and to share a little bit about his journey. So we hope you, Ralf, enjoyed our podcast interview today, and we look forward to sharing that with our listeners as well. And find us on successinsightpodcast.com, as well as on our Facebook and LinkedIn pages, Success Insight Podcast. And we are on the major podcasting platforms, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Spotify. And inside Spotify, we have the Outdoor Adventure Series playlist, which we'll also share a link there. So you can not only hear about Ralf, but you're going to hear about the other individuals we've interviewed for our Outdoor Adventure Series, including Peter Zelinka. So really some great episodes. And do let us know what you think about these episodes by sending us emails, commenting on the episode comment fields. But, again, this is just a great opportunity, especially outdoor adventures. Get out there, enjoy yourself, take your friends, take your family, get some fresh air and explore. And as Ralf had said, be prepared. Make sure you are prepared for the environments that you are going into. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day, and we will see you on the next episode of the Success Insight podcast. And we have more episodes to come for the Outdoor Adventure Series. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.